My name is Matthew Pellegrino. Friends call me Matt, and I am a Korean American adoptee. I was born in Chungcheongnam-do Province in 1994. 4 months after I was born, I was adopted to the United States, where I grew up with my parents and sister on Long Island. I had a pretty standard American kid upbringing. We lived a very comfortable lifestyle, not like super rich, just kind of middle class. So I grew up on the South Shore of Long Island, this little town called West Islip. My town is pretty notable for two things that kind of make sense together. Number one is apparently we were really good at lacrosse for a long time. And aside from that, my town was extremely white. Hesitate to admit it sometimes in front of my parents, but I kind of think it did have a pretty profound effect on how I grew up and how it shaped my worldview. People kind of ask you when they find out oh, you're an adoptee. It's oh, when did you know? When did you find out? And it's I do not remember not knowing. I was a pretty self-aware kid, I think, and pretty in my head a lot of the time. And I just always knew. But the thing that I had a hard time with when I was a kid was I faced a lot of bullying, racism, discrimination, and all that. And I just don't think my parents really were equipped to handle that in the way that I wanted them to be. And then, of course, when you grow up, you realize, of course they're not, because as much as they can try to understand you and empathize with you, it's just not something that they can fully understand from their worldview. In first grade, I was playing soccer, just town soccer club or whatever. There were two coaches. They both lived 2 blocks down from me. So I kind of knew the kids from school. They were in my grade. We were just doing a soccer practice, scrimmage or something. And I had a really bad temper when I was a kid. And one of the coach's kids said something to me, probably Chinese boy or, making fun of my eyes or something. And when I was a kid, I'd see red, I would snap, I would get so angry. So I charged at the kid. And of course, he's got buddies on the team. So I remember basically just took turns pushing me in the dirt, antagonizing me. And my mom came to pick me up from soccer practice, and I was covered in, dirt and scratches and maybe, I don't remember, bruises. I don't really remember. And she's like, "What happened to my kid?" And she got really mad, of course, and she went over to the coaches and, "No, that's their kids." So coaches said, "I don't know. Must have happened when we had our backs turned or something, It's a sport, boys will be boys." And I just remember, kind of taking it in and trying to talk to my mom about it, why'd that happen? Those are the adults, right? They're supposed to be held accountable for that. They're not supposed to let that happen. And that's when I learned really quick, okay, it doesn't matter. That's just going to happen, and there's nothing I can do about it. That kind of did happen a lot in my life, middle school, high school. I remember verbal, physical, violent stuff happening to me about race. Kids would throw trash at me in the lunchroom or hallways because they knew I couldn't do anything about it. And I think in middle school is when I just kind of stopped getting angry, at the very least. I just stopped getting angry about it. Instead, found other ways to deal with it. When I was 18, I went to a small, maybe not even small. I went to a State University of New York at Fredonia. It's just this liberal arts campus in upstate New York, kind of right underneath Lake Erie. So I went there because I knew they had a strong music program for pretty much anything, but they were really known for music education. I thought about doing that, but towards the end of high school, I had another good friend that told me I should probably consider composition, because that was something I got a little bit interested in at the end of high school. So I applied to their comp program and I got in. I ended up studying that all 4 years and a little bit of oboe performance. And I studied music composition through my master's too. And I'm still technically studying it for my doctorate right now. I've been doing my master's and my doctorate at Peabody Conservatory at Johns Hopkins down in Baltimore. To explain how studying music got me from the US to Korea, it's a little bit complicated, and it mixes a lot of personal and professional life. So in my master's, I was studying composition at Peabody, and moving from Long Island to upstate New York was not a big shift at all, except a very kind of rural, middle of nowhere environment. Demographically, though, the two places were quite similar. But moving then from those places to Baltimore was a huge shift. I had no idea going to Peabody or even about Johns Hopkins in general, that it's a really, really big university with a really diverse student body. Being at Peabody, being at Hopkins, that was my first time actually being around like a huge amount of just other Asian people. And I think prior to being at Hopkins or Peabody, I had only met like one Korean person at my previous university. So the fact that I think like some absurd number, like 30 to 50% of the student body, even at Peabody, is Koreans, was just like total culture shock for me. I had never been surrounded by that many other Asian people in my life ever before at all. At Peabody, I started interacting with other like from Korea, international students, more and more on a daily basis. That environment really was the time that I was actually forced to confront my Koreanness in learning to and becoming interested in interacting with Korean people more at this university setting. So during that time, I think my Korean roommate actually showed me a parody of a K-pop music video. These like middle school boys did a parody of the song TT by Twice. And I was like, this is really funny, like very good internet humor. And then I was like, wait a minute, this song like actually is really good. And I became interested in K-pop. I started becoming more interested in eating Korean food. And at the time, I also was, I started dating a Korean girl. So through all of that, I started just becoming more and more interested in like Korean culture and like my Koreanness and kind of looking more inward at this for the first time in my life. Towards the end of my master's, I had started learning some Korean. I started becoming more interested in Korean music. And that summer, after finishing my master's, I decided, you know what? I think I want to do a birth search. I think I started it like officially, like had signed all the forms and whatnot and gotten them back to my adoption agency, like in June. By the next month, they said like they had made contact and like found my birth mother and that she would be open to receiving a letter. So I was like, okay, really kind of flabbergasted by it because I didn't expect it to be that quick and that easy. I remember kind of getting on the phone with my parents and being like, hey, so I know I told you I was kind of doing this, and they were really cool about it. They were totally on board, totally understanding, totally behind me, like since day one. I couldn't have asked for like anything better. I ended up sending like a 1-page letter, which was really weird to write, and like 13 pages of pictures. And that was it. I think that letter went out right at the beginning of July or end of June or something. I was like moving at the time. It was a very chaotic time of my life. And then I just had to like wait. But I remember like August 9th, and I had this email all in Korean in my inbox, and I just freaked out and immediately tried putting it into Google Translate, but it was like really bad. And then things moved really fast. I figured out a way with some help to get to Korea for the very first time that winter of 2018. Arranged a meeting with my birth mother through like email correspondence and stuff. And I was also trying to learn Korean at this time. Just started out for fun, but then became very like imperative. And that was my first time coming back to Korea in 2018, just to see the country for the first time and meet my birth mother. Meeting my birth mother was very strange looking back at it. It was a very weird day. It was, I think, the second or the first day after arriving in the country. And in the letters, the emails exchanged between me and my birth mother prior to coming to Korea, she said that she would do what she could to meet with me in like a comfortable way. But she also mentioned that she worked at a big company, and the company had a amateur musicians like club, and they were having a concert in her town that night. And I was like, well, if my birth mother is going to be playing music, then I definitely want to see that. So that was the day after I arrived. And we were like, okay, you know what? We're going to try and go to that, see the concert, and meet a little bit afterwards. So we took the bullet train down to their city. and spent like a little afternoon there just kind of like eating. My, at the time, girlfriend came with me, and she's native Korean, so she was really helpful through all of this. We went to the concert first. And that was when a lot of this started getting really real for me and really nerve wracking, like really fast. Because all of a sudden I realized, like, okay, wait a minute, this is a concert. There might be other people here that I'm related to at this concert. So I was freaking out because I was like, what if we accidentally see each other? What if I see someone that might be my family? This concert hall was smaller than I expected. So we sat all the way in the back. I like hunched down in my jacket as much as I could. And I think the distance between me and the stage was like maybe me to like that wall. I was like trying to read the program that I couldn't really read yet. And then my girlfriend was like, that's her right there. She's going to come out in the middle. So I had to sit through this first like 30 minutes of the concert knowing like, oh my God, there's probably family members in this room. And then when she came out, I was just like super weirded out because I just had to look at her from like, short distance and just kind of like watch her. And I immediately started doing this thing where I was like, oh, what is she doing? Like, does she have like this kind of nose, or like what's she doing with like her hair? Does she have like any of my weird twitches or anything? Also, at the end of this concert, this little kid gets up to sing with like a adult person in the group. And I'm like looking at this kid and I'm like, something about that kid. I found out later that was my little brother. And I was like, but anyways, so the concert ended. We went over to the place where we had arranged to meet, and we were sitting there waiting. And I just remember like every time someone walked past our little room, I was like super on edge about it, like getting really nervous. I was like looking over my Korean notes to try and remember like the right ways to say hello and like all that stuff, which completely went out the window anyway. Yeah, so she came in. It was like a sliding door, like a pocket door. And she opened up the door, and I just remember thinking like she's really small. But other than that, I don't remember too much of like even what exactly was happening and like what I was thinking. I just kind of like blanked out for a minute. I remember like getting up because I knew you were supposed to get up and like bow and say hello. The next thing that happened was the door got stuck on the rails, so she couldn't close it. And then I just guess I went over and picked it up and closed it for her, and we were face to face for the first time. And well, she knew exactly what to do. She just hugged me, and I think I just started like sobbing like a baby, like immediately. My birth mother, it turns out she's just like an angel of a human being. She speaks some English pretty well for her job, and the first two things that she said to me were, "I'm sorry," in English, and "I love you." Yeah, I think I just like broke into a million pieces, like right there. And then once we'd stopped crying, we just kind of sat at this table. She brought like a little bag of clementines, super typical Korean mom. I think she was like looking at my hands first, and she was like, "Oh, you have purple under your nails, just like me." Or like, "We have long fingers," some stuff like that. I think the next day I came back down to her city, and she had like blocked out the whole day to just spend the day with me and let us get to know each other, which was like super weird. Again, very surreal. That day I learned a lot about her, and her family, and like her life here. And she wanted to hear all about like my life growing up and like my family and all that stuff. She sat us down at a budae-jjigae restaurant where I learned for the first time how much spicier budae-jjigae is in Korea. And she just said, "All right, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. Ask me anything." So we probably spent like 2 or 3 hours like sitting on the floor of that restaurant, just talking it all over. She's been very open to talking about a lot of things, and I think I'm very lucky in a lot of regards. Again, the more I meet other Korean adoptees and hear other Korean adoptee stories, I feel conflicted because I know that what happened to me does not happen to like most other people at all. At times, I feel very like bad kind of talking to other Korean adoptees because I know that they didn't have the experience necessarily that I had. And I also kind of, as the years have gone by, I've become increasingly kind of aware of when I tell people what happened to me, I want to make sure that they know this isn't how it usually happens. With all of that in mind, I do feel really lucky that my Oma turned out the way that to be the person that she is, and I hope she feels the same way about me. I really need to like thank my parents and like it's hard to express how much I appreciate their role in this. Not only were they really supportive in like all of the ways that like I had to deal with this, especially the last few years. Honestly, I couldn't have asked them to do anything different or do anything better. Even when I was a kid and I was having all those hard times, um, they did everything that like they thought was right. And I don't think I necessarily appreciated it enough when I was a kid. Everything with coming to Korea, like that's a really hard uh, relationship for adoptees to navigate after a union, especially, is making sure that like your parents' feelings are taken care of. Even though I'm saying I feel like I'm basically split between families and like worlds at this point, they've always been like my rock and my foundation that I know I can always, they're there and they'll always have my back. My name is Matthew Pellegrino, and this is my Korean American story.